Hey guys, this is going to be a video response to a series of videos uploaded by a user called Kachukeland, along with a friend of his, in which they give a very entertaining and generally well thought out, opinionated, and highly negative review of the book Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. And I want to preface this by saying that my response will contain major spoilers for the book, as does their review, by the way. So if you haven't already read the book, and for some reason are watching this video and wish to avoid spoilers, you should not continue any further. Additionally, if you haven't seen the initial book review that I'm about to respond to, then please click the link and watch their series first, because I'll be replying directly to them, so my points will be easier to understand if you watch their initial video first. Thanks.
It's the book we've been waiting for.
The end to the great saga.
The conclusion to the story that seemed it would never end.
It's the culmination of all of our hours and faith put into one special boy. And it sucks! Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows is easily the worst book in the series, and a sad way to bow out of the limelight.
This review will contain every spoiler imaginable, and will be 99% negative. The review will be split into two sections, personal dislikes and plot holes.
Alright, Kachukeland, let me say before I go any further that I loved your video the first time I watched it, several years ago, whenever it was recently released. I loved it then, and that's because when I first read the book myself, I didn't much like it either. But after rereading it several times since its release, I've actually become rather fond of it. And since I've read responses from you in the comment section of your video as recently as 20 hours ago, despite the video being around 3 years old, I'm assuming that this topic is still relevant to you. And that's why I decided to present a difference in opinion regarding a few of your points. Again, I really liked the review, and anybody who hasn't already seen it should check it out now. It was funny, and I appreciate the level of passion behind your guys' efforts with the video, as well as your willingness to give an honest review of a very popular book which does contain flaws, in full awareness that you've opened yourself up to an endless flame war with angry fans. That said, I seriously disagree with a number of your points, and that's why I've decided to craft this little video response. I'll start off by saying that I agree with much of what you say. When you bring up what I believe to be a good point, I'll acknowledge it. Again, I must stress that I enjoyed the video even though I liked the book very much. The only things I wish to respond to directly are in large part the alleged technical mistakes of this novel that you bring up, that I believe to be error-free. I won't, in most cases, attempt to sway your opinion when it comes to matters of personal preference. And again, I agree with several of your personal dislikes as well. That said, your 4-part video is split up into 2 sections, those being personal dislikes and plot holes. The issue I have with this is that several of the alleged plot holes you have uncovered are in fact personal dislikes. Things like Harry and Hermione's relationship being more favorable to Harry and Ginny's, or your feeling that Dumbledore's treatment in this book ruined the character.
Time for the fun that is plot holes. Let's start with the way J.K. Rowling ruined many of her beloved characters with writing so goofy you feel like they're from another book. Well, let's start with the star, Harry Potter. Now, Harry is pretty consistent for the most part, but he decides that when he hears Rita Skeeter's reports of Dumbledore in her book and that Dumbledore is a very bad person, he turns on Dumbledore, believing that the old coot was trying to deceive him and that Rita Skeeter is right.
This is very interesting considering that Rita Skeeter has messed with Harry on several different accounts and tried to ruin his reputation, and Dumbledore has always stood up for Harry.
But I guess when you're in love with Ginny Weasley, it's hard to stay true to your own character. Although Ginny had a crush on Harry in the 2nd book, he didn't like her back. And that was it. Ginny was hardly even a character until the 6th book. Harry and Hermione are perfect for each other. It feels natural when they're together. When they were alone in this book, it was perfect.
Right, so the first points you addressed under this section were character inconsistencies. Now, I will concede that I always favored Hermione as the ideal love interest for Harry, but there were ample signs in almost all of the novels, from very early on, that Ron and Hermione were always going to end up together. I also agree that Ginny's treatment as a character was largely cursory up until the 6th book, when she suddenly became the object of Harry's affection. But that doesn't really make it a plot hole. Additionally, you claim that Dumbledore and Harry's relationship would have had more tension if Rowling would have revealed his past and the details of his past and his youth in the sixth book while he was still alive.
If she just had to put this in there, she should have put it in the 6th book. That would have created so much more tension between Harry and Dumbledore. He was the one character who wasn't human. He was above that, and that's why we looked up to him. Now you've ruined that and turned him into just an old man. He thinks he killed his sister and talks about how greedy he is. The man was already gone. Why can't you just leave it at that?
I would first point out to you that this, too, is not truly a plot hole. Just a personal opinion. Next, I would note that the reason this portion of the 7th book is so vital, not just to Harry and Dumbledore's relationship, but to the ultimate direction of the series, was that it tested Harry's loyalty to Dumbledore. Because Dumbledore is dead, he can't speak for himself at this point. It's what kept Harry on the path to finding Horcruxes and not succumbing to that temptation of his of seeking out the Hallows. You noted that Harry shouldn't have been so easily swayed by Rita Skeeter's scathing articles about dead Dumbledore. But what you have to realize is that at this point, it's obvious that Harry has always had to be self-reliant. He's parentless. The Dursleys never did anything to improve his lot, and therefore, throughout this last book, he spends most of his time on his own with only his peers to look to for guidance and support, and the fact that he is now more alone and without protection from his elders than he has ever been, coupled with Dumbledore's death and inability to express exactly what steps Harry should have taken throughout his journey, he's frustrated. These things frustrated him and tested his faith in Dumbledore. The fact that Dumbledore's past was not the perfect fairy tale that we all probably imagined it would be, and that Harry imagined it would be, but one filled with disappointment and tragedy and greed, a very tragic youth. These things humanized Dumbledore, and they forced Harry to come to grips with his feelings toward the man whom he had once seen as perfect. It shattered that childish view we all had of Dumbledore, and of parental figures in general. He was human. We are all human. We're not perfect, and Harry had to discover that. He had to forgive Dumbledore and look past his flaws and stay true to the man whom he owed so much to. That's what made them not just teacher and student, or a powerful wizard and chosen one by the end of the series, but true friends with tremendous compassion and courage, true and equal Gryffindors. While Dumbledore has a checkered past in his youth, the man was still everything we as the audience, and Harry, always knew him to be. Far from ruining the character, she's improved on him in my opinion. Preserving the ideal view of Dumbledore as some perfect entity with absolutely no faults at all was not the goal of the novel, so it can't be called a plot hole that Rowling chose not to portray him as such.
Brilliant, J.K. Speaking of Ron, why is he smart in this book? In every other book, he's just an idiot who tries to be funny and does nothing but cause trouble. Yet for some reason in this book, he's a smarty pants. I mean, I can't explain it, and he's still an awful human being. But he seems to somehow have importance and ideas to contribute to the story this time around. And this comes from where?
I'll admit now, I've never been much of a Ron Weasley fan either. But the fact remains that people grow up, and some do so faster than others. I think he matured after he abandoned Harry and Hermione, and in effect became a stronger component to the group dynamic. It even says that he took an active leadership role throughout this book, perhaps to make up for his transgressions. And while he may have been a jerk many times earlier on in the series, he's not a terrible person, just a jealous and insecure one. These are traits that we all share at times. He's also very young. There's no need to hold it against him completely. And he keeps the group together, and clearly cares very much for his friends. Now, your comments on Voldemort throughout this series, however, are absolutely correct. It's truly astounding that he came off as idiotic as he did in this last book. Now, I'll argue that Voldemort has never been considered a genius, that he's certainly always been portrayed as intelligent, and was known to be one of the most brilliant students ever to attend Hogwarts, which I'm assuming didn't just apply to his magical prowess. However, there's no excuse for his foolishness in this novel, and I agree with everything you said about him, especially his treatment of Snape before he killed him, as well as the fact that he takes stupid and unnecessary risks in this novel for the sake of convenience for the author. I'd also like to point out that I never understood how it was possible for Voldemort to consider the Room of Requirement to be a place he had only ever found, as he claims in this novel. With all the collected junk of centuries hidden in that room, how he imagined himself to be the only one to know of its existence is beyond me. Also, if you were the heir of Slytherin and there was a secret chamber of secrets located deep within the bowels of the castle that only those who spoke Parseltongue and knew the location of the secret entrance could gain access to, wouldn't you consider that the perfect spot for hiding a Horcrux? Now, I understand and even like the notion that on a very great level, Voldemort's arrogance blinds him and leads him to his downfall, but some of his behavior just descends into pure stupidity and there's just no good excuse for it. So I do agree completely with your assessment of Voldemort in this novel. Alright, moving on. So the next thing I'll address is the issue of Harry's wand acting of its own accord and defending him from Voldemort as the latter pursued Harry during his flight from Privet Drive. Now you guys claim that the book doesn't really explain this, but Dumbledore does offer an explanation, and it is in fact a guess, yes, but in the same chapter, it's explained that Dumbledore's guesses usually turn out to be correct. In any event, Dumbledore explains that Voldemort redoubled the connection between Harry and himself when he took Harry's blood to rejuvenate himself in the graveyard in Goblet of Fire, and afterward the two engaged in a duel which culminated through a connection of the twin wands because of their twin phoenix cores. And when Harry displayed the mental and spiritual fortitude by accepting and, according to Dumbledore, even embracing the possibility of death, something that Voldemort was certainly never able to do, Harry gained a power greater than that of Voldemort's, and so the wand imbibed not only Harry's tremendous courage, but Voldemort's unparalleled magical skill when the wands connected, and during that connection, this is where that relationship is forged. This is where the ability of the wand to act as a defender of Harry against Voldemort is born. It doesn't happen until after the confrontation at the graveyard. This is what allowed the wand to defend Harry later on, toward whom it owed its allegiance against the one wizard whom it recognized as enemy, that being Voldemort. And unless I'm much mistaken, and of course I invite anybody who's watching this video to send me a comment explaining whether I am or not, the reason the wand chose that specific moment to attack Voldemort was because I think, as far as I can remember, that was the first time since the two had met in the graveyard where they raised their wands to one another. Again, I could be mistaken, but that's the way I remember events, because I don't think Harry fought Voldemort at all at the Battle of the Ministry, and I don't think that Voldemort didn't even appear in person at any point in the 6th book. So the phenomenon was in fact explained. You then claim that it was foolish for Harry to hide at the Burrow for obvious reasons, and then you went into extreme detail about why it was ridiculous for Ron to locate Harry and Hermione in the way that he did, both of which are points I completely agree with. I too was entirely baffled at the way Ron found the pair with his after his departure using the Deluminator. Even when the film was released, Part 1 of Deathly Hallows, in the theater that I saw it in, that scene was met with a lot of confusion and awkward laughing and muttering from the audience. So I agree, it was a completely nonsensical plot device. I still don't really understand it. Next, you say that you didn't really understand Snape's feelings toward Harry after his revelations and memories, and also doubted Snape's feelings for Lily as legitimate grounds for Dumbledore's trust. I have to disagree with this. Clearly there was no love between Snape and James Potter. That much is obvious. Equally obvious is that Lily was Snape's one true love. A combination of jealousy, as well as vivid memories and recollections of his many grievances toward Harry's father, along with the simple fact that Harry looked so much like James, proved to be too much for Snape to come to grips with. He couldn't look at Harry without seeing his one-time rival. It's understandable, and Snape's grief for the hand that he played in Lily's death, though unwittingly, was enough to show Dumbledore his sincerity. So I thought it was not only the furthest thing from a plot hole, but also one of the most beautiful portions of the entire series, if I'm being honest. Next, you address the issue of Harry's disfigurement at Malfoy Manor. I'm conflicted on this point as well. While I agree with the fan perspective you mentioned in the video that it was probable that Malfoy, or Draco Malfoy to be more specific, did in fact recognize Harry, but in an attempt to do good as a result of his disillusionment with Voldemort after seeing the kind of world Voldemort ruled over, it's also odd that Malfoy would later stand in Harry's way during the Battle of Hogwarts. I suppose the only thing that makes sense is that Malfoy himself is not pure evil, and so had no desire to murder anybody, and for all his talk, did not have an ounce of bravery himself, which is why he remained on the Death Eater's side during the climax. He was just trying to survive without being directly responsible for any acts of true evil. Again, you guys have a point, but the issue is kind of vague because Malfoy himself is a conflicted character at this point in the series. Now, aside from the point you guys made about Dobby's death, which I don't personally take any issue with in the book, I agree with everything you guys pointed out about the entire end sequence up until the moment where you brought up Nagini's death. Especially the point about Ron being able to get into the Chamber of Secrets. I've always thought that that was just ridiculous. However, I don't take any issue with the fact that the Basilisk Fang was still potent enough to destroy the Horcruxes, but that's all a matter of interpretation, I suppose. When it comes to Nagini's death at the hands of Neville, I must point out that any true Gryffindor can pull the sword from the hat. It's also stated that Harry noticed that Griphook the Goblin had never intended to help them, and he even betrayed them during their break into Gringotts. He violated the terms of the deal anyway, so I think that would have broken the contract the two had made between themselves, magic or otherwise. It's also explained that the reason Voldemort's curse on Neville couldn't last was because Harry's sacrifice for his loved ones and friends provided them with the same protection Lily once gave to him, meaning that Voldemort's powers couldn't work properly against them. I believe Harry points this part out during his final confrontation with Voldemort. Once again, I agree with you, Voldemort's actions against Snape didn't make any sense and serve any purpose other than convenience for Rowling. Though, as anybody who has seen the film can attest, that version of events was not only slightly different, but it certainly made more sense and still allowed Snape to share his memories with Harry. But in the book, this is a flaw.
So, after Harry learns Snape's past, he goes to face Voldemort in the forest, knowing he has to die because he's a Horcrux. He gets blasted with Avada Kedavra without a fight, talks to Dumbledore in his head, and then wakes up where the curse knocked him down. Okay, here we go. Biggest question, why did Harry survive the killing curse? Again. Well, according to Dumbledore, it's because a piece of Voldemort's soul was attached to Harry's, making him a Horcrux, and so Voldemort blasted his own soul and not Harry's. But how? Why did it destroy Voldemort's souls and not Harry's? Was it just plain luck? I mean, was it that it could hit either one of them and it just happened to hit Voldemort's? Was that what happened? I mean, besides, I'm pretty sure Avada Kedavra kills your body, not your soul. If it killed your soul, its victims wouldn't be able to appear as ghosts, now would they?
Now we reach one of the more complex explanations. Why did Harry survive the confrontation with Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest? Well, the answer goes back to the original attack on the Potter's Cottage in Godric's Hollow at the beginning of the series. When Voldemort killed Lily and James Potter, and then attempted to murder an innocent baby only moments afterward, he split his soul, which was already mutilated, even further. Lily's charm, which protected Harry, allowed him to survive, and as Dumbledore explains, this led to Voldemort's fragment of soul attaching itself to Harry's, the only living being in the vicinity, thus making Harry an unintended Horcrux of the Dark Lords. The reason why Voldemort's fragment of soul did not simply expire is because Voldemort had already created Horcruxes by this time, and so the wizard could not die. In the moment that created Harry the Horcrux, Voldemort's body was destroyed, but his essence remained in the guise of the fragment of soul that hid in the forests of Albania, until he eventually managed to rejuvenate himself with Wormtail's help. This was, as Dumbledore explained in Book 6, the last piece of soul that would need to be attacked in order to finish Voldemort once and for all. So that's how it survived. Now, when Voldemort used Harry's blood to reconstruct his body in Goblet of Fire, he took in a small portion of Lily's charm through Harry's blood. This charm is what kept Harry alive when Voldemort first attempted to kill him, and in his arrogance, Voldemort himself took in the charm through Harry's blood and manifested it in a body outside of Harry's own. This meant that the charm could still tether Harry to life, even as Voldemort blasted him with the killing curse in the Forbidden Forest. The protection charm only worked on Harry's soul, for it was he that his mother had sacrificed herself for, not Voldemort. As the charm only applied to Harry's soul, Voldemort's fragment was therefore vulnerable to his own killing curse, and since Avada Kedavra wipes life from the physical body, Voldemort's mutilated fragment of soul was what was removed from Harry's, and that of course was the whimpering figure you see in King's Cross in that limbo realm in which Harry converses with Dumbledore. You next questioned the way in which Harry's body was attacked, leaving Voldemort's soul vulnerable by asking whether or not Harry, being himself a Horcrux, would have had to have been destroyed using a Horcrux destroying item like the Sword of Gryffindor or a Basilisk's Fang or something. Now this is a matter of my own personal speculation. This is pure speculation on my part, but I believe that Rowling knew what she was doing here. As stated, a Horcrux must be destroyed beyond magical repair, and in the 6th book, Dumbledore said that to create a Horcrux out of a living creature or living being would be inadvisable due to the dangers posed to the creature's health. Now, as we all know by this point, Avada Kedavra possesses no countercurse. No spell can reawaken the dead. Thus, a dead body is beyond magical repair. And so Avada Kedavra would likely have no effect on a Horcrux attached to an inanimate object, but to a person, it would obviously be lethal. So while this whole explanation may be elaborate or even confounding in some ways, it's not really a plot hole.
And while we're on that subject of the first attack, why did Harry survive as a baby? Because his mother died protecting him? That's all it took, huh? So no other parent or friend ever died for their child or for one of their friends. They all just said, "Oh, shit, take him, Voldemort."
If that's all it took, why didn't Dumbledore just tell everyone,
Hey, everybody! All you have to do is love someone and be willing to die in their place, and Voldemort is powerless!
You then asked whether or not the personal sacrifice was all it would take to make Voldemort powerless due to the fact that Harry's sacrifice is what saved all his friends during the final battle. But ask yourself, is it really such a simple thing to do? Is it really that simple? To love as Harry and his mother were capable of doing, and then be willing, perfectly willing, to lay down your own life in exchange for another's? This is much easier said than done, and it is this uncommon courage and capacity for love that Dumbledore has always told Harry would be his greatest strength and most powerful weapon to use against Voldemort's evil. It should also be noted that during most of the battles we are witness to throughout these novels, wizards and witches who duel to kill don't give much time for others to stand in the way of their opponents. Indeed, Voldemort offered Lily the option to stand aside because Snape had asked him to spare her if he could. She had ample time to position herself between her son and freely offer up herself in favor of Harry. This was an unusual opportunity. Though it was true Voldemort often toyed with his victims, Avada Kedavra is a very swift attack, and it's improbable that most of the beings who ever dared to stand in Voldemort's way would have been given enough time to do what Lily did. You may call it a plot hole, but I find it unlikely that most people would have, or in fact even could have, done what Harry and his mother did. Agreed, it was foolish for Voldemort to avoid checking whether or not Harry was truly dead, as previously stated, though his behavior in this last book is disturbingly out of character. I would attribute this more to his arrogance than anything else. Voldemort is exceedingly arrogant, and it causes him to make huge missteps along the way. So this one, I buy this one. I don't think it's a huge plot hole. I see where you're coming from, but I'm willing to forgive it. But I must disagree with you completely that the final battle setting at Hogwarts was misplaced. Where else could it have meaningfully occurred? Hogwarts is the centerpiece of the entire series. I also disagree that it was laughable of Harry to prompt Voldemort to feel remorse. As Hermione explains, feeling true remorse is the only way to put your damaged soul back together. After you've split it and committed so many acts against nature, so many acts of pure evil, mutilating your soul to such a horrible degree. And what Harry was actually doing here was he was delivering a last warning to Tom Riddle, just as Dumbledore would have done. Remorse was Riddle's last hope of avoiding the horrible fate that awaited him in death. The fact that Harry had seen that being whimpering in the King's Cross station, it showed him what Riddle was going to become. It wasn't as though Harry truly believed Voldemort would take him seriously, or that he even believed he could even be redeemed at this point. But he offered him one last escape from the terrible punishment that awaited him in the next world, you see. And of course, Voldemort didn't take the offer. Now, everyone's perfectly entitled to their feelings as to whether or not the final confrontation was good or bad, but that's not to say that the confrontation itself was really a plot hole. That's just all personal opinion. However, as far as the Elder Wand theory goes, you're absolutely right. I've thought about it long and hard, and I just can't make head or tails of this thing. It's a massive plot hole, mostly because of the vagueness around the parameters around which a wand can be won, and the mess that's created with all the disarmings and defeats that have occurred throughout the series. I too have never understood how it was that the Elder Wand even came into Dumbledore's possession after his duel with Grindelwald. The Elder Wand is perhaps the greatest plot hole in the entire series, and I just don't have a good answer for it. It, along with the drawn-out camping sequences, are what lowers this book's status in my mind, though I do in fact enjoy it very much. Now, I love the book, but I admit there are several instances where characters act inconsistently. Several of the deaths were either unnecessary or were not given due respect. The feuds you mentioned, such as Lupin versus Greyback, thank you. I'd been waiting forever to see that, and it didn't happen. It was a huge disappointment. Same with Neville versus Bellatrix Lestrange. These things weren't given any respect, and a lot more attention could have been paid to several of the details in this novel, of course. That said, this series isn't perfect. For instance, Percy Weasley takes points away from Ron in Book 2 for coming out of a girl's bathroom. Later on in Book 5, outrage is caused by Malfoy, who is given powers to deduct points from houses as a member of the Inquisitorial Squad for Professor Umbridge. Something prefects apparently shouldn't have been able to do prior to this moment in the series, regardless of what happened in Book 2. Also, I've never understood why Harry has to wait until after he witnesses Cedric's death in Book 4 before he finally is able to see Thestrals in Book 5, regardless of the fact that he apparently watched his mother die, or at the very least, if he didn't remember that, or whatever the excuse is, he was present when Professor Quirrell died. So, there are plot holes here and there, and it's hard to find perfection in this huge series, but regardless, I enjoy all 7 of the books in order from most to least as follows: 4, 3, 7, 6, 5, 2, and 1. It was a great ride, and while I have done more than a few things differently to wrap it all up, I do think that Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows was a good way to end the series, and was one of the best books in the series, regardless of a few major issues. Anyway, thank you Kachukeland for making such an entertaining video, and thank you everyone else for watching. Feel free to leave a comment and or rating in the sections provided below, and I'll talk to you all later. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.